Hello, 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 hello. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us this morning or uh, this afternoon. And some of you, it's probably late afternoon. You're all welcome to another edition of Leadership Academy. This is brought to you by AfriWIC International Organization and Circle Leadership Organization. Today, we're going to be talking about understanding the principle of process. The principle of process. Before I jump onto the principle of process, I just want to get this out of the way. Last week, there was a question. Somebody sent me a question about discovering your identity. And the question was that probably when somebody discovers his or her identity, it will lead the person to be arrogant, which I believe I addressed that during the discussion we had last week. But I just want to touch base on this briefly, and then we'll jump over to today's topic. See, when you discover your identity and you know how important you are to the world, and you know how much the world is counting on you or waiting for you to help solve certain problems you have been uniquely gifted to do. It puts you in a place of humility because it makes you understand that in as much as you are important to the world, other people are equally important to the world. Because when you contribute your portion to make the world a better place, somebody else also had to contribute his or her portion to make the world a better place. So when you have that understanding, when you discover yourself, it puts you in a different understanding. Remember, we spoke about understanding the purpose of your identity. So when you discover the purpose of your identity, it puts you in a place of knowing that you are important to the world because the world needs you. So if the world needs you, then the world needs me as well. Then the world needs somebody else as well. So as important as you become, you realize quickly that other people are equally important as well. So that humbles you and it makes you treat people with respect, because then you know this person is the next person who is solving a problem which might facing me myself. I am solving somebody else's problem, somebody else is solving my problem. So the issue of identity does not bring arrogance, especially when you understand the purpose of your identity. It humbles you because it makes you understand that the world needs everybody. Everybody is a team player. And so you treat people with respect. All right. With that out of the way, I just want us to zoom straight to today's topic, which is understanding the principle of process. And I don't know how to belabor this point, which I'm definitely going to be repeating myself because this is a very, very, very important topic. Understanding the principle of process. You see, as I always say, life or everything in life has a purpose. And if it has a purpose, then it has principles to them. So principles are laws of nature. They don't change. They are the laws of nature. And laws of nature are rooted in purpose. Again, principles are laws of nature, and laws of nature are rooted in purpose. So principles don't change. No matter where you find yourself, no matter your geographical location, no matter your status in life, no matter who you are, no matter the color of your skin, no matter your height, no matter your size, principles don't change just because you live in a different geographical location. No, principles don't change just because you are of a certain status in life. No, principles are laws of nature and they don't change. And remember, principles are rooted in purpose. And so today we're going to be talking about the principle of process. This begins our series of principles of leadership. The principle of process begins our series of principles of leadership. And remember, time and time again, we say principles are a set of values or a manual by which an entity operates. Principles are a set of values or a manual by which an entity operates. In other words, principles are rooted in the purpose of an entity. So when somebody thinks of making a thing, the reason for him or her creating a thing or making a thing would determine the principles by which that entity has to be operated by. So if somebody is making a phone, the purpose of the phone is to make calls. And therefore, the principles of utilizing that phone is going to help you to fully maximize the purpose of the phone. So in other words, if you buy a phone, you have to find out how to operate the phone, and that becomes the principle by which that phone is to be operated. So principles, we cannot run away from principles when we're talking about leadership in life. We cannot run away from leadership principles, sorry. And so today we're taking a look at the principle of purpose, understanding the principle of purpose. We are going to try and put this together in about 30 minutes. So I have about 7 points listed here. We're going to be going through them. First, I always say that the principle of process, to me, is the first principle of life and leadership. The first principle of leadership, or the first principle of life. If you really want to understand and really want to have a deeper understanding of life and leadership, first have to understand the principle of process. Because the principle of process puts everything into perspective. It puts everything into perspective. So, first of all, like I said, the first principle of life and leadership is the principle of process. The principle of process. All right. So, the unfolding seasons and period purposefully planned between birth and death in order to bring maturity to life. This is the definition I have given to process. Process is the unfolding seasons and periods purposefully planned between birth and death in order to bring maturity to life. In other words, between birth and death, process has to take place in order for life to be matured. So every entity, every stage, every process in life is a stage of bringing us to maturity. So I want to repeat my definition of process one more time. And I say process is the unfolding seasons and period purposefully planned between birth and death in order to bring maturity to life. So it is purposefully planned. In other words, we cannot do anything about it. We can't do anything about process. If we want to live this life and live it to the fullest, we have to understand the principle of process. We cannot change the principle of process. Remember, I said principles are laws of nature, so we cannot change them. Number two, after we've dealt with the definition, now let's look at number two. You go through process to achieve maturity. In other words, you cannot jump from one end to the other if you don't go through the process. Let me say this. I know I'm going to catch a lot of heat for saying this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Sometimes people go to church to pray. Guess what? I'm not against prayer. I'm not against prayer. You cannot pray for money if you don't work. It's a principle. You have to go through the process. You know, we need to teach this to our children, so they will grow with that understanding that life goes through process in order to get you to the expected end. So we don't jump from A to Z. We go through the process of life. So in order for us to be able to come to a level of maturity, in order for us to be able to come to a place of fullness and fulfillment, we have to go through the process of life. So if we avoid process, mind you, there would not be maturity. We cannot achieve maturity without going through the process. We have to get this at the back of our minds. There cannot be end results without process. So process brings us to maturity or to the expected end. So let's say you have a plan, you have a dream, you have a goal, you want to reach somewhere. You first have to start from thinking of how I am going to get to this place. What is going to be the first step I had to take? And after the first step, what is going to be the second step I had to take? So these are all processes which will bring you to the expected end. And every stage or every period of this process had to be fulfilled. Like I said from the beginning, I don't know how well I can stress on this point. But if you understand this point, this principle of process, everything about life will fall into perspective. So, in order for us to come to a place of maturity, in order for us to come to an expected end, we cannot avoid process. Because every stage, every period of our lives will take us through to the expected end. And we have to fulfill every stage of that process. Every period of that process has to be fulfilled. Number three, process brings us patience. I was listening to Steve Harvey the other time, and somebody asked Steve a question about how she was going to deal with a boss who is very condescending, and she can't take it. Sometimes she feels like snapping, but then that's your boss. There's nothing you can do about it. And I was glad when Steve said, have a plan, have a 90-day plan. In other words, put a process in place, a process of exiting, a process of leaving that job to another job. Do you know what process does? And Steve told her perfectly. It gives you patience. It gives you endurance. It makes you endure because you know that you're going through a process and the process will end somewhere. It gives you endurance. So he said, put a process in place, put a plan in place, a 90-day plan to exit out of that job. So anytime you are aggravated, anytime your boss does something wrong to you, you tell yourself, it is for a moment. I'm going through this process. And it's for a moment. So process gives us patience. It gives us endurance. It will make us endure whatever we are going through. Because we know that we have to fulfill that stage in order for us to move to the next stage. And all of these come together to put us in a place of maturity. Number 4, process brings the beauty of life in us. Process brings the beauty of life in us. In other words, when we subject ourselves to the periods and the moments, and we fulfill the periods and the moments, it refines us. It brings us to the place of beauty. It brings us to a place of fulfillment. It brings beauty out of us. And a typical example is gold. When you see gold being mined, you got to go through the dirt, the mud, to dig out gold. And when you dig the gold out, you process the gold to purify the gold, to refine the gold. It has to go through a process to become a beautiful piece of jewelry. So life is made up of process. We cannot avoid, we cannot bypass the principle of process and expect to get to the expected end. It does not happen. So like I said, I don't care how hard you pray and how well you pray and how articulate you are in prayer. It will not and it will never bring you money until you go through the process of work. So sometimes some of these processes saves us some unnecessary pain in life. So process brings the beauty in us and the beauty of life. And a typical example is a gold. You cannot have a piece of jewelry until it's gone through a process of refinement. It's gone through a process of purity before we can admire the beauty of gold, before we can admire the beauty of diamonds, before we can admire the beauty of all these jewelries. If they don't go through the process, guess what? There ain't gonna be any beauty in them. So process is very, very, very important. We need to understand this. We need to get this at the back of our minds. We need to teach this to our children so they know that whatever you earn, you have to earn it through a process. And that is where our minds get corrupted. That is where our minds get messed up. And so people are looking for shortcuts to make life an easy, rosy bed for themselves. It does not happen that way. Life goes through a process. That is why we're born as babies. Nobody was born a full-grown man or a full-grown woman. We were born as babies, so we go through the process of learning and understanding, and the process brings us to a place of maturity. So at one stage we lie on our back or on our stomach and we cry for food, we cry for everything, because that is our means of communication. And then we move on to the next stage, and then we move on to another stage where we sit, and then we move on to another stage where we crawl, and then we move on to another stage where we stand, and then we move on to another stage where we start to walk. So until we understand all these processes and go through all these processes, life is not going to fall into perspective for us. So we cannot avoid the process and expect to get to the expected end. It does not happen. It's a process, and we have to understand that, and the process will bring the beauty out of life. Number 5, process will save you from delays and unnecessary difficulties. Process saves us from delays and unnecessary difficulties. Process saves us from delays and unnecessary difficulties. I just want you to write that down, because when you go through the process, remember I said every stage has to be fulfilled. And when that stage is fulfilled, it takes you to a place of maturity. So it gives you understanding of the whole process. It gives you understanding and a bigger picture of where you are going. And so it will save you the delays. Because sometimes people can attest to the fact that we've been through some unnecessary delays because we did not follow the simple process. For instance, when you go to school and you don't learn to pass first grade and be graduated to second grade, third grade, fourth grade, if you don't take care, you're going to repeat some of the grades because we refuse to follow the process. And so it eliminates, anytime we follow the process, it eliminates unnecessary delays and unnecessary pressure. Because then at a point in time that you have to work extra to be able to make up. But when we follow the process, it makes it easier for us. So it is important that we understand this principle of process. It will save us the delays and the unnecessary difficulties. Even in relationships, you realize that you're not getting the results you expect to get because you didn't follow the process. So it is very, very vital for us to grasp this concept of the principle of process. You realize that when you get to a certain point, you realize that, oh, if I have learned this earlier, this would have been better. Life would have been better, or I would have taken a different decision, or would have taken a different route. So for instance, if you want to travel from point A to point B and you know the route, you map out a process by which you get to that route. So it avoids, you avoid all the delays and the unnecessary pressure on you to get to that expected end. So number 5, process will save us delays and unnecessary difficulties. And as I gave example in school, if you follow the due process, you graduate from first grade to second grade, third grade, and every process, every stage brings you to a place of maturity. Number 6, process saves you from stress. I always tell people, stress is not in my dictionary. I don't know stress. Because when you understand the process you're going through, you will come to understand that it is a time, it has a timeline. Every stage has a timeline. So you don't stress. Knowing that the stage has a timeline, you don't stress because you know that you have to go through that process in order to get to the next stage. So process eliminates stress from our lives. Number 7, process puts everything into perspective. And I think I said that before. And it brings a deeper understanding and wisdom to us. Process puts everything into perspective. Everything in life can be brought into perspective if we understand the principle of process. For instance, when we go to school, our teachers don't start teaching us grammar. They first start teaching us A, B, C, D. 1, 2, 3. And then the next stage, after you have matured in that first stage of A, B, C, D, then they put 2 letters together. So N-O, no, G-O, go, L-O, low. So when you master that process, when you achieve maturity in that process, then you move on. And then gradually you begin to form sentences. Why? Because it gives you a deeper understanding of the alphabets and how you can put them together to construct a word or a sentence. So if you skip some portions or some periods of the process, guess what? Life is going to be difficult. We have to make sure every process is fulfilled. And when you understand the principle of process, like I said, it brings wisdom, not smartness. I'm not talking about being smart. When you skip some of the processes, that is when you have to be smart in order to survive in life. In other words, being smart is doing what you got to do to survive. But when we subject ourselves to the process or the processes, it gives us a deeper understanding. It gives us wisdom to know that we don't have to do what we got to do to survive, but we have to do the right thing for the benefit of all humanity. That is wisdom. Doing the right thing, or the application of truth, as I always say. An application of truth will lead you to doing the right thing, and it will bring peace and harmony and beauty and justice to our communities. So process will give you a deeper understanding. It will bring you wisdom. So in order for us to be matured in life, for life to fall into perspective for us, we got to understand the principle of process. I don't know how to stress this point, but when you understand the principle of process, life will be easy for you because it gives you a deeper understanding. It refines you. It purifies you. It gives you patience to go through the process, to go through the stages. It gives you a deeper understanding to learn from the stages in order to be matured. But then again, if you miss any of the stages, there is a point of redemption where we can go back and learn. And remember, it's not going to be easy. When you skip any of the processes or any of the stages, process becomes very difficult. Now you have to put some of the stages together in order for you to get ahead. But there is a point of redemption where we can redeem that process. We can redeem that stage. We can redeem that period. But it's not going to be easy. So I just want to conclude that let us subject and submit ourselves to the principle of process in everything we do, be it schooling, even marriage. That is another place where this understanding is very important. Let us submit ourselves to the process. When you submit yourself to the process, the period of singleness, the period of courtship, the period of engagement, whatever, if you submit yourself to all these processes, not just submitting yourself to the processes, but learning to understand all these processes, it makes the marriage a beautiful one because it brings out the maturity in the marriage. It brings out the beauty in the marriage. So I just want to entreat all of us, even as we wrap up this discussion on the principle, understanding the principle of process, let us not avoid any of the stages or the periods within the principle, within the process, because that and that alone will take us to the expected end. I just want to thank you for listening. I know Petty is listening from Zambia, and I have my younger brother too listening. Next week, we are going to continue the principle of leadership. We're going to continue with the principles of leadership, and I want to encourage each and everyone to be a part. You can send your questions to us. You can message us with your questions, and we'll address them next week. Thank you for listening, and have a wonderful day. And until then, we're going to meet again next week. My name is Nana Osei Bonsu Jr. of AfriWIC International Organization and CERTO Leadership Organization. Thank you, and you have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.